De'Aaron Fox signed an extension with the Spurs on Tuesday. Could this impact Tyler Herro's future with the Miami Heat? We'll break it all down on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. For daily content on the Heat, join more than 17,000 Heat fans and click that subscribe button on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Have a great show for you today. The market might have been set on Tyler Herro's extension. Plus, we have an update on what stars might be available for the Heat next summer. But first, let's start with the news around De'Aaron Fox. Fox has signed a 4-year, $229 million max extension with the Spurs to keep him under contract through the 2029-2030 season. There's a bunch of interesting stuff that we can get into with this, but I want to start with kind of what we were talking about earlier this week when it came to Luka Doncic. The Spurs are not the Lakers, but I'm also not surprised that the Spurs re-signed De'Aaron Fox. We talked about Luka re-signing with the Lakers, taking him off the market in 2026. Fox re-signs with San Antonio. Again, not much of a surprise there. It takes him off the market in 2026. Are you surprised by the extension?
Not surprised that the extension was given. More surprised at the amount rather than anything else.
Yep.
Oh.
That's it?
I mean, no, I think it's a ridiculous amount for De'Aaron Fox. Like, I really do. $55 million a year for the continued extension there. Like, I don't. Maybe I've lost sight of some of the contract sizes around the league and what a player is worth it. But I don't see him as that kind of player, especially when you've already got Victor Wembanyama there. You've got some young players you just drafted, et cetera. You've got a future there. I don't know why you'd commit that kind of money to a player like Fox. It's, as good as he is, and I really do like Fox. I think he's a fine player. I just can't wrap my mind around that. In terms of what we're looking at around the league and how some contracts are staggered and the price tag on some of these players, I don't know. It just feels like a player like Fox getting paid that much money just doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me.
It's a big, there's a sticker shock associated with $55 million, right? But I think it's important to put it into context of what it is in terms of the percentage of the cap, because these cap numbers are going up and all these max extensions are projected, and it was a max extension, right? But it's going to be around 55, 57, whatever it is, whatever the salary cap ultimately ends up being. But these max numbers are based on a percentage of the cap, and for Fox, it's 30%. It's 30% of the cap. And for a guy like De'Aaron Fox, look, I agree, it feels like an overpay. I think it probably is an overpay. I tweeted kind of half jokingly, like, that's a lot of money for a one-time All-Star, knowing how Heat fans were going to take that. But it's still a lot of money. And I understand De'Aaron Fox is playing in the Western Conference, and it's harder to make All-Star games in the Western Conference. De'Aaron Fox is a very good player. He feels like a player who should have been an All-Star more than once. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of player that he is.
Sure.
I would say, to your point about, well, they have Victor Wembanyama, they just drafted Dylan Harper, they have Stephon Castle, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. Those guys are cheap right now because they're on rookie contracts. So if you're going to overpay for somebody, now's the time to do it, right? Not all overpays are created equal. And for San Antonio, they're in such a great cap space right now because all of their best players are still so cheap, except for De'Aaron Fox, obviously, that you can, you're like, okay, well, we're getting Victor Wembanyama at like $12, $13 million a year. That's like one of the best contracts in the NBA, considering he's a top 15 player already at the very least. We can afford to overpay De'Aaron Fox by even $10 million a year, which kind of feels like that might be where it is.
Yeah, I understand that idea. But the extension doesn't kick in immediately, though, either. So we're talking about having to kick that can down the road a little bit. And at that point in time,
Well,
maybe
it's next
other
year it
players
comes in.
Either way, some players will be due for their own respective extensions during the terms of
there will
Fox's
definitely be
contract.
a point where the Spurs get expensive. That's for
Listen, I'm not here to argue whether or not the Spurs have made a good choice or not. I'm just saying in terms of, and I don't know why I'm making this point, to be honest with you, because I have been historically, I should say, a pro player, and the idea of get your money, I'm all for it. It just doesn't feel like the kind of value for a player like Fox. And I don't even care about the All-Star nods or not. We've debated that before when we were looking at Fox and before he was traded out of Sacramento, whether or not he was the star player. He's definitely not a superstar. I don't think he ever will be, or I think he would have been by this point of his career. I don't think he's going to be in San Antonio either. This kind of feels like superstar money to me. And that being the case, it feels like an overpay. And, again, this is San Antonio's problem and San Antonio Spurs fans' problem. So it's not exactly a concern for me. It just feels like if you're going to start looking at this as the baseline for other players across other markets, it's kind of a dangerous place to be in.
Well, in terms of where the Heat stand now, I mean, this is a guy that you already talked about it, but like we've talked about De'Aaron Fox as a trade deadline guy. I remember talking before before the February trade deadline, could Miami somehow trade Jimmy Butler in a deal that lands them De'Aaron Fox, right? We were having those kinds of conversations here, and you're right, like he's a shaky shooter from the perimeter. He's only had one good season from shooting from outside over his career. There are injury concerns. Defense is pretty shaky. He's an okay passer playmaker, not an elite one. He's a very good scorer. But I even by the time he left Sacramento, the Kings were kind of sick of him.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some warts there to his game. So I agree with you that this is an overpay. This is an overpay for De'Aaron Fox, but I also understand the context in which San Antonio is probably agreeing to overpay him. They're probably in that front office being like, yeah, this is probably an overpay, but we're okay with it. That said, going back to trying to tie the Luka conversation into this conversation, the thing we talked about Luka was that was always a pipe dream. I think the De'Aaron Fox thing, whether you wanted him or not, as a Heat fan, was always going to be a pipe dream because as soon as he got traded to San Antonio, he was re-signing there. They traded for him with the understanding that they were going to re-sign him to an extension, and that was going to be the case even after they moved up in the lottery and got Dylan Harper. They weren't going to just say, you know what, we have a rookie, now we're going to just punt on De'Aaron Fox. They weren't going to do that. Not after they gave up assets for Fox. So I guess for the Heat's purposes, in case anybody needed more reminding, the Luka extension and the De'Aaron Fox extension now, taking two of the top free agents off the 2026 market, proves that the Heat will not be able to sign their next star player in free agency. More likely than not, they're going to need to trade for them. That's how you get these players. That's how the Lakers got their star. That's how the Spurs got their De'Aaron Fox. You have to trade for these players that you want. And this is why it's called around the league pre-agency, because when these extensions start coming and these other front offices around the league start questioning, do we want to pay this guy or not? That's when those guys become available. And Miami's going to have to pounce on that guy if they want to get that guy, because they can't rely on free agency.
It's the new norm now, right? I can't recall the last time a player has signed a major free agent deal. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but it happens less and less frequently. It seems like free agency is mostly now for the mid-tier or lower players, like those guys that kind of, filling out maybe the third or fourth options on teams all the way down the road, and that's
for depth,
kind of
right? For filling holes on a roster,
Absolutely.
Right? Like I'm trying to think. It's a great point. Like Paul George last year, technically, even though it didn't work out, but I mean, he signed a big deal, and like Durant going to Brooklyn in 2019. That's kind of it?
Kyrie at that point too as a free agent. Like
Kyrie the same summer. 2019 was a big summer, but
it's kind of winnowing out. I mean, we're talking 2019. I think it was 5-6 years ago now. So I mean, already we're starting to move on from that. I mean, Pascal Siakam, Jimmy Butler, Luka, Fox, etc. Like you trade for these players, you sign extensions with the teams that trades for you, and Miami has to change their approach. So I think it. We'll talk about the salary cap impacts, and I know a lot of people have been talking about Barry Jackson, the Miami Herro, tweeting about, what the salary cap is going to look like next year for Miami. Luka, Fox, probably never realistic options. At the same time, now, if you're going to have to upgrade this roster, and that's a given, then you're going to have to do that via trade. Free agency is no longer an option, as you said, and it's about acquiring a player and clearing the cap space necessary in order to sign these long-term extensions. So I don't know. Are you looking at players down the road who might be extension eligible that might be forcing a trade, and whether or not Miami can pounce on those moves, as you said?
That's the way it is, right? And we do have a list of names I want to get to here in a second. But more than that, De'Aaron Fox getting his extension. What does that mean for Tyler Herro and his pending extension talks? We'll get into all of that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Well, maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize, you know what? I want to be in the stands. And that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, guess what? You can splurge on food, drinks, merchandise, even invite a bigger group to come out with you. Invite a couple of friends there. Maybe they've never been to a game before. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time's the official ticketing partner of Locked On Major League Baseball, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming Major League Baseball game. You know what? The Marlins are in town. They've got a couple road series away here, but they come back soon. Go and support this team because they've got a lot of pep to them. They're
playing
exciting.
the Astros this week. They leave after this.
Yes, that's right. So this is the time for you to grab those tickets right now. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can do that with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Before we continue, announcement that we want to share. We're launching our 25 of 25 series where we rank the top 25 Heat players of the last 25 years. It's a big project that we're working on. We're really excited. We're going to start doing shows next week about it. But before, we need your help on deciding those 25 players. So to cast your vote, join the Locked On Heat Insider community, where we are sending the link to the survey every morning this week. Sign up with the link in the show notes to the Locked On Heat Insider community, and then you will get that link to the to your ballot. Do it now because voting ends Friday night. De'Aaron Fox's new contract works out to roughly $57 million per year in annual average annual value, in the range of what Tyler Herro can sign starting in October, $50+ million. Now, like Tyler Herro, De'Aaron Fox is a one-time All-Star. I think there are obvious holes in Fox's game. I like De'Aaron Fox. Like we already discussed, this is probably a bit of an overpay. I think you're okay with it if you're San Antonio. But my question here is whether or not Tyler Herro and his representation, do they look at this De'Aaron Fox contract and say, well, he got $50 million a year. We should get that too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think absolutely. That's what aids its job. You're always going to push that envelope. I think Tyler just feels like that kind of player, youngish, still with plenty of career left, and at a point where he has to decide how much money he wants to make over the course of his career. And I think it's an interesting position for him to be in because I think a lot of, we talked about this in the past. Tyler is now kind of at the forefront in terms of how other extensions like this were going to be completed and how much money he's going to be able to make and just how much he can get out of these teams. I think Fox certainly sets a high precedent. I think Herro is certainly now in a position where he could say, how does he view himself in terms of the league? Is he among the elite players in the league that he feels he deserves that kind of money? I would argue that he does. I think that's just, again, I'm not reporting anything. It's just my feeling is in terms of how Tyler views himself and what he's done over the course of his career, continuing to improve, he's going to want as much money as he can possibly get.
Yeah,
and that's an agent's job too.
Yeah.
No,
and he's going to look at De'Aaron Fox and say, hey, one All-Star there, one All-Star here.
Yeah.
Right. And you can argue Tyler Herro has been deeper in the playoffs than De'Aaron Fox has, but in terms of, I guess if I were gonna push back on Herro and his representation, I do think the circumstances are a little bit different, right? Like De'Aaron Fox was traded to San Antonio with the understanding that there would be an extension. They used assets to trade for him. just a handful of months ago. So they didn't want to trade those assets to get De'Aaron Fox and then let De'Aaron Fox leave for nothing or be disgruntled in this final year of his contract. So it's a little bit of a different situation. De'Aaron Fox also has shown that I think he could be the best player on a playoff team. And I think, by the way, that they would have beaten the Kings. They would have beaten the Warriors a couple years ago if he didn't hurt his hand towards the end of that series.
That's fair.
Like, we have seen that from De'Aaron Fox. We have not seen yet from Tyler Herro over these last 2 years that he can be the number one option on a team that wins a playoff series. So there's a difference there as well. Herro also does not have to sign an extension this summer. That's a huge difference in this, right? De'Aaron Fox, if he was going to sign the extension, it had to be this summer, or else he was going to be a free agent next summer. Herro can sign the extension until next summer, which is something that I think is very much on the table, right? I think there will be conversations when Herro is contract eligible, or extension eligible rather, starting in October. I think there will be some conversations, but if they can't come to some sort of agreement, and I would imagine that that agreement doesn't look like a max contract, then Miami could say, we're just going to wait until next summer. They can do that. And so those are some of the differences in terms of how much more leverage it felt like Fox had. But if you fast forward a summer, Tyler Herro is going to have leverage because teams are going to have cap space in 2027 when he could be an unrestricted free agent and potentially leave for nothing. So he might not have as much leverage now, but that leverage is coming. So I think that there is some big differences, even if on the surface it kind of looks the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to parse there. It's an interesting. I will say this first and foremost. I don't think Tyler. I think, moreover, is. I hate again using the terminology worth or anything like that to kind of put a player.
It's hard to pay that player 30% of your cap, $50+ million a year.
Yeah,
I think that's a really key difference in these two situations as well. Is like what we were talking about with De'Aaron Fox. He's sort of the one expensive player on the Spurs roster. The Heat are not like that. They've already paid Bam,
right,
$50+ million a year. He's that guy, and I don't know how many guys. Well, I do know. I think you can have two guys making $50+ million a year, and that's it. So if that's if that's how many guys you can have to have a real conversation of what two guys do we think are worth it. The other thing here is, I think one of the ways that front offices have to think about contracts like this is if we give Tyler Herro $50+ million a year, how tradable is that contract if we have to get off of it for some reason? And I would argue that's going to be a tough contract to get off of. So I don't think you can pay Tyler. I'm on record of being the Tyler Herro apologist, but I'm also here saying you can't pay him $50+ million a year. I can appreciate Tyler Herro for who he is as a player, but at the same time, understanding from a roster building perspective, we just can't pay him. We can't pay him. And I'll just say there's two things here. And I want to go back to a point you made about how Tyler Herro views himself in the league and what he wants to accomplish in the league. If he wants to reach the NBA Finals again, he has to take less. He has to. And it's on Miami's front office to communicate that. There's no way to build a championship roster around Bam and Herro making $110 million combined, making upwards of 60% of your salary cap. You can't do it. It's impossible. You can't build that roster. So what does Tyler Herro want? Is he willing to do a Jalen Brunson and say, I'll take less money if it means we could build the team around me?
I mean, that puts him in a really tricky position because players, there are certain levels of status that are tied to contracts around the league. And as much as you might think, or you wouldn't want to as a fan, you wouldn't want to believe that or see it that way. I think taking hometown discounts, as they've been called in the past, those kinds of things are for the fans. And yes, the front office gets to breathe a sigh of relief, but the players need to show each other that they believe themselves to be those kind of players. They're always going to pursue more money. And I think that's where Tyler is at this point right now. I'll go and take it one step further. What does Tyler have to do over the next year? Let's say he punts between now and next offseason in order to be the kind of player that might be more, quote unquote, deserving of that max contract extension.
He has to be the number one option on a team that wins a playoff series. And that probably is going to take a big playmaking jump from him. Like that's what I think that would
Yeah.
take for the Heat to be able to do that, because there's no questioning his scoring, his shooting, and all these things. But what this team needs is a engine, and they don't have an engine on offense right now. And if Tyler Herro could prove to be that engine for a team that can win a playoff series, then we can start having that conversation. But until then, I just don't know that you could pay guys just off guards in today's NBA. They just don't. That's tough. It's tough to commit financially to an off guard in today's NBA, because again, we're in a world where we're not in a big 3 NBA anymore. We're kind of in a big 2, and then fill out the rest of your depth. And the off guard used to be the third guy, right? You need an engine of your offense, and you need an anchor of your defense. Bam is the anchor of Miami's defense. He's worth the money. Done. But if you're going to pay somebody else that kind of money, then they have to be the engine of the offense, because it's really hard to find those players who are engines of an elite offense that aren't making the max or something close to it. So, it's like not even personal to Tyler Herro. It actually has everything to do with this new salary cap. Players like Tyler Herro used to just get the max.
Right.
I just don't think that we live in a salary cap world anymore where you can afford to give those kinds of players the max. It's a tough market for off guard. So unless Herro proves that he could be an on-ball lead playmaker guy for an offense that can win playoff rounds, until we get to that point, I don't think that you could pay him like that. So there is one other point that I do think is worth making here is the Heat did take care of him before. Like the $100 million contract, that was, or it was more than that, whatever it was, where he's making now $30 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
That was looked like as an overpay by most Heat fans, and probably around the league. Everybody was like, that's a pretty big bet on Tyler Herro. He has been worth the money so far. They've already taken care of him once. And I wonder if that plays a factor at all in the relationship between player and front office here. Do you have anything else on this before we move on?
No, I think that's a good point. But we typically don't see players say, oh, well, you took care of me once, especially if he continues to improve. Because then again, they're going to always bank on themselves. They're always going to have the belief, however realistic or not it might be, that they're going to continue to either stay excellent or continue to excel and get better. And that's what his representatives are going to pitch towards the Heat front office. It's that this is a player who's gotten better every year. He's going to continue to get better. And if you want to pay a player that's even better than what he is, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for it.
So with Fox off the table, where does that leave the Heat looking next summer? We're going to talk about what stars are still options after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need. Maybe you wanted a plumber or a service provider. Well, if that first person didn't answer, did you wait around? Probably not. You moved on. And that's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. It's got a shared inbox feature that's a total game changer, because your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And their AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and capture leads, so you never miss a customer. How vital is that in today's market? Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. We'll be right back.
All right, so let's take a look at Miami's salary cap situation going forward here. So in 2026, next summer going into next season, the Heat have 8 players under contract. That includes Andrew Wiggins, who has a player option. So they have 8 players under contract with Wiggins. Essentially no cap space, but plenty of room under the tax and the aprons. So whenever you keep hearing about, hey, Miami, they want to maintain flexibility, all of that stuff, this is what they're talking about, right? They're not talking about, oh, we have a bunch of cap space, because they don't. But they have a ton of flexibility because they're so far under the luxury tax and the cap aprons that they have the use of mid-level exceptions, the full mid-level exception, and plenty of wiggle room and no sort of rules against what kind of trades that they can make necessarily. So that's where they're at. Now, they do have the ability to create cap space. To do that, they would have to renounce Terry Rozier, Norm Powell, Simone Fontecchio, and Haywood Highsmith. So if they renounce all of their free agent rights, which would mean that they can't sign and trade them, and they would just be unrestricted free agents, and that's it, and they would be off the books. Miami couldn't re-sign them with bird rights, none of that stuff. If they were to just renounce those 4 players, and Wiggins declines his player option, then they can have about $25 million in cap space, plus things still like the non-taxpayer mid-level exception that we already talked about. So there is some wiggle room here to create some real cap space, and there is real flexibility to go along with it. What they don't have next summer is the space necessarily to sign a max level free agent. Now, maybe that doesn't matter because we already talked about in the first segment, David. Max level free agent superstars don't usually become free agents. After Luka Doncic and De'Aaron Fox and Jaren Jackson Jr. signed extensions, there's not a great group of guys in 2026. That basically leaves Trae Young and LeBron James as the only 2 guys right now who are without a contract going into the 2026-27 season. So there are ways that Miami could figure it out. They could do sign and trades to go get those guys if they want. Like I said, they can open up $25 million in cap space. I don't think Trae Young or LeBron would come for $25 million or less than that. So whatever. But there's they do have the flexibility to go and get those guys via sign and trades and other things like that if they really want to make that happen. But you know what? I'll stop there. Trae Young, LeBron James, I guess, thoughts on everything I just said, because I want to circle back to a point you made earlier. But before we do that, I'll pause here.
No, yeah, nothing specific to add there, because it just shows you how the market has changed so much. It always used to seem like free agency was the way of being able to build your team and continue to address areas of need of acquiring said star, and that market just continues to shrink throughout the league. And there's nothing wrong specifically with either LeBron or Trae Young, but again, to your point, neither of them, I think, likely to be on the move. I think if they were going to move Trae Young, it would have been this offseason. And I think LeBron controls his own destiny, even at this stage in his career. So I'm not sure exactly what he wants to wind up doing. But again, I think if he wanted to leave the Lakers, he probably would have done so by this point, and he would have forced his way to whatever team would have.
So to circle back on that point about, hey, you got to trade for these superstars now. You made the really good point earlier. If you're the Heat's front office, or if you're any front office looking for a superstar, who are the star players coming up for an extension? Because that's what I'm looking at. Because as soon as those extension talks break down, now I'm thinking that those players are available. By the way, Trae Young on this list right now, he's going to be extension eligible here also. And if he doesn't reach an extension, maybe he gets traded right before training camp starts, right? Like, you have no idea what's going to happen between now and the start of the season. There's still plenty of time left here. So these guys are out there now, but they might not be by the time we reach next summer. But if I'm looking at extension guys who could potentially be free agents in 2027, if they don't reach extension agreements with their current teams before then, now maybe we have a list of guys who could be potentially gettable between now and the summer of 2027. So really specifically next summer, when these guys tend to move, pre-agency, right? That list is a lot more interesting, David. That list includes Giannis, Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell. That's the list. And if you're the Heat and you are dead set on superstar pursuits, and I don't mean to get Heat fans' hopes up because there's too much of that out there right now. But if you're also the Heat's front office, there's got to be a whiteboard somewhere in your Kaseya Center office with these names on it. Just being like, okay, if something happens and one of these guys becomes available, are we ready to pounce? Are we ready to make our move on one of these guys? Those are the names on that whiteboard.
They have to be. Not just that, and that has to be the primary goal. I think Miami's done as good a job as possible of building depth through the draft, of getting players here and there, acquiring Norm Powell and clearing some of the, extraneous players on that roster was a really smart move. But I think ultimately, if you're trying to put your team to contention, acquiring a star level player has to be the main pursuit. because I think they're fully aware of where Bam and Tyler are. But you've made the point before, and you made it earlier. Bam has so much value, and you can argue that as much as you want to as a fan, but ultimately, again, the front office believes it, and the numbers back it up. Bam is a winning player and contributes to winning because of the impact that he makes across the board. So you're just going to have to learn to accept it or change your view of what a star level player is. Bam it is, and Bam, it fits that category. He fits that description, and he's going to continue to be greatly appreciated by this front office. It's just a matter of you getting the other star player to complement him that's going to be able to take this team to another level offensively. And I don't know that it's Tyler. We've talked about this before. So having to acquire that player is of a paramount importance for this team if they want to be able to contend. So you're looking at those big names, and as unrealistic as they might seem right now, that's the goal. It has to be for this team to acquire a star level player. And I don't know how it's possible. I don't know what'll be left on the roster if you make other smaller ancillary moves, but the goal is still the goal, because right now you just don't have that star player. This is a different discussion than 3 years ago. This is a very different discussion than why couldn't Miami get the power forward that could complement Jimmy Butler and that group when they were going up against other teams in the NBA playoffs. That's a different conversation, because Butler was that guy. Butler was that player that could reach that next level, especially during the playoffs. They don't have that anymore. And it's not Bam, and it's not Tyler, because at least we just haven't seen it from Tyler. If he reaches that level this year, I would be greatly surprised, but pleasantly so.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, it's just you don't often see players up their averages to the kind of levels that we saw from Jimmy Butler.
Or just change the way, like we've already seen a dramatic style of play change from Tyler Herro, and he was asked to do two very different things last year before Jimmy Butler got traded and after Jimmy Butler got traded. I think Tyler Herro can get better, but to the point I made earlier, is he ever going to be the guy who moves the needle for an offense in the way that the Heat need? That's the biggest question. Now, if you're looking at this list, Giannis obviously can do that. Nikola Jokic can obviously do that. Donovan Mitchell, I think, can obviously do that, right? There's a guy on MVP ballots this summer, or this past season. So, that's why we're keeping these names on a whiteboard somewhere. But that'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes are must listens over there on the Locked On NBA channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.